Let's go to Barnaby Joyce, the former Nationals leader and Deputy Prime Minister, now Shadow Veterans Affairs Minister. He's fired up about the renewables push in the bush, creating ugly confrontations in regional areas right around the country. Joyce agrees that this seems to be the battle zone of our times.
Well, it is, and Grant is now chair of a national body with Katie McCallum up there in Queensland, Neil Kilkeevan, and Hamilton Gerard down in the Gippsland in Victoria, and that gives you a sense of the dispersal of people across our nation that are now rallying to a standard and saying, look, we've got to be heard on this. I believe they're only going to be heard when they turn up in Canberra, to be quite frank, in big numbers. And we've got other battles that the Labor Party has to explain for themselves. They've got a offshore wind projects at Port Stephens, and no doubt people will be, Grant Piper will be contacting them, and they've got to coordinate. It's got to be an organic movement of people. It can't be led by politicians, but they have a democratic right to be heard. And I know in our area of New England, people are so divided, but they are so angry, and they just feel powerless. They feel that they are being dispossessed of their land, dispossessed of the environmental aspects and of what they looked at. They've been surrounded by an industrial landscape of wind towers higher than the top of the Sydney Harbour Bridge, so that a place such as Walker, it's got more structures over 260 metres higher than the Sydney CBD. If people want them in the cities, if you think it's a virtue, then apply to have them at the edge of your suburb. And of course you won't, because they're disgusting.
This is the point, isn't it? We've been in touch on this program with communities in Goulburn, in Port Macdonald in South Australia, in Queensland, in New South Wales, in Coolar tonight. But I'm wondering whether all those people voting for the Teals or Greens and Labor in those city electorates realise what their renewable dream is doing to the countryside.
Well, you take the Port Stephens issue. I mean, people there are rightly very upset about the fact that they'll be offshore of Port Stephens. Well, if the Teals like the idea, then apply for them to be offshore of Manly and offshore of Bondi, and Middle Head and Sydney be a perfect site for a few wind turbines. And North Head, you couldn't
North
get
Head,
better than
South
North
Head.
Head. Yeah,
solar farms at North Head and South Head, and wind farms just off the coast there. Maybe a couple of turbines right in there in the middle of the harbour would be beautiful for them. Now, a lot of these issues were explored at the Nationals National Conference on the weekend, Barnaby. You put up a motion, though, and I think we've got a copy of it up on screen here showing what was deleted, but you suggested that the party should abolish its policy of net zero by 2050. And that was deleted, and weasel words about a practical approach to lowering carbon emissions were inserted in its place. This is a big call for you. You want to abolish the 2050 target.
Well, it was a motion actually from John Anderson and former Senator Wacker Williams. It was debated, and of course you have, I suppose, a responsibility for people in your electorate to support the motions that they send to a federal council, but it was debated and it was lost, and I accept that. I accept the democratic process. Later on, a further motion came up that asked for an immediate moratorium on large-scale wind factories and large-scale solar factories, and referral of them to the EPBC Act for a proper, more diligent approval process, and that went through. I think it went through unanimously at the Nationals Federal Conference.
But do you personally believe that 2050 net zero target should be dropped by the coalition?
Well, I'm a member of the Shadow Cabinet, and this is a position that the Federal Conference has endorsed, and my job is to be a barrister on their cause. I would say that hand in glove with that target, you have to be very aware of the costs, as Net Zero Australia has pointed out. $7 to $9 trillion. That is the same as the combined corporate profits across the globe for a year. It's the same as the cost of the redevelopment of Europe after the Second World War under the Marshall Plan. People have to be aware this is not cheap. This is not the cheapest form of power. This is incredibly dear, and it's incredibly expensive. And I suppose the best way to ground truth that is have a look at your power bill.
But the point is, if you keep chasing this target, if the coalition's committed to this target, A, it probably won't be met. On most assessments, it's impossible to do this unless you go to nuclear. But secondly, as you mentioned, the cost will be exorbitant.
Well, we do support going to nuclear, and I'm very glad of that, because nuclear would mean you don't have to build the transmission lines back and forth over people's properties across the nation at the cost of tens, I'd say in the end hundreds of billions of dollars. But really important your listeners know, your renewables are incredible. They're not even renewable. There's nothing renewable about a wind factory or a solar factory. They end up in landfill. But incredibly expensive. And Ontario, in the Ontario studies, they quite clearly say that wind is 50% dearer than nuclear, and solar is 400% dearer than nuclear. So please spare me, CSIRO. You've got one view and the rest of the world seems to have a different one.
We'll keep on this issue. Thanks for joining us, Barnaby.
My pleasure.